for those that aren't present, and we'll get started. All right, very first thing we're going to do, if we're making these recipes, we're going to make 2 recipes tonight. Hopefully you have them both somewhere somewhat handy. I apologize that one's on one side and one's on the other side of the paper, but it makes it convenient. You only have to have one piece of paper, unless you made a copy of both. We're going to make our watermelon salad with our fresh herbs, and we are going to make our herb-infused strawberry lemon loaf, or lemon strawberry loaf. We're going to kind of mix and go as we go through the process. So we're not going to complete one and then start on the other, because there's components of each that we got to do as we're going through. And the very first thing we're going to do is we're all going to preheat our oven if you have not done so already. And the recipe for the strawberry loaf says we need to preheat our oven to 350. So we're going to go ahead, turn on your oven to 350. So it's preheating if you have not done so already. After you preheat your oven, we're going to kind of start on one component of each recipe. We are going to work on melting our butter on the one recipe, and we're going to work on reducing our balsamic vinegar on the other. But before I do that, just so I can get these out of my way, I want to talk a little bit about the loaf pan we're going to use. You might have, you can buy loaf pans all different sizes. The recipe that we're making calls for an 8.5 by 4.5 loaf pan, which is a normal sort of size bread pan. It's very popular to find one that's just a little bit bigger. If that's the only one you have, I think you'll be fine. Your bread's just going to be more flatter, not as thick, maybe, if that's the right word. And it might cook a little quicker because it's spread out more in the process of cooking. So just adjust your times as you are baking it. And if you do not have parchment paper, you're welcome to just prepare your pan with spray. Now the recipe actually calls for us to butter the inside.
I'm sorry there.
I'm looking to see who might not be muted, because that feedback. So remember to mute yourselves if you can. And basically, even though we're putting parchment in our pan, we're still going to treat our pan. It says put butter. You don't have to put butter. You can put spray. If you don't have parchment paper, you can just spray your pan to keep it from sticking. But the reason why we're going to spray the pan and then put our parchment paper down, it keeps this from sticking. We do not have to do any treatment to this. We're going to put our batter right on top of it. Makes clean up and everything a little bit easier, and it makes the loaf come out extremely good as well. Jennifer, I'm going to make you co-host. Yep. So you can people. Okay. Okay. Thanks. So I'm going to spray my pan. You already had butter out. You wanted to butter it, you could. Spray works just as good. I'm going to push my parchment paper down into my pan. Leave it hang out over the edges just a little bit so I can have that done and out of the way, so I have all this other room to do everything else I need to do. Typically, my pan looks like this when I'm done, in case you need to see. And then I'm setting my pan aside. I have 2 pans that got out and ready. So if you don't have 2 smaller size pans, get them out and ready. One we're going to melt the butter in. One we're going to reduce the balsamic vinaigrette in. One is for the vinaigrette, is for our watermelon salad. The butter is for our bread. We start the butter for our bread. If you read the recipe, this is where some of your herbs are going to go into it. You have bay leaves. It actually called for fresh bay leaves. Fresh bay leaves is extremely hard to find. Dried is okay. Don't crush them because you don't want any part of this in our bread. So I'm going to take my bay leaves that should have been in the very bottom of your bag, or you might have extra around your house, and just stick them in my pan to start with. You should have had some thyme in your bag. You're going to need a little bit of your thyme for your watermelon salad, so don't use all of it. And even though it says 10 sprigs, whatever you can get to put in there is going to be fine, but save a little for your watermelon salad. Put your sprigs.
That's okay.
And your
Okay. If you turn it to the side, it'll flip.
So I've got bay leaves and thyme in there. Next, rosemary. Rosemary was the herb that held up the best in that bag. And I apologize for how your herbs might look. If you have your own herbs, I hope you got to go out and pick a few of your own. But we got them in bulk, and they just don't hold up well if you try to keep them for a few days, the way you can get them in. And it was way too expensive for me to not get them any other way but bulk. So you got your rosemary. You're just gonna kind of breaking it a little. I'm not trying to get any of the petals to fall off, but I'm just kind of massaging it a little and stick it in my pan. You can kind of do the same with the thyme. And the last thing that you had is basil. And the basil is probably, if you're using exactly what was in your bag, very dried out, kind of looks very limp. That's okay. It's still got flavor. And we're not using the prettiness of this. We're just getting the flavor from it. So you're just going to kind of drop that in your pan as well, and any other basil you might have. So you got all those herbs. You should have bay leaves, thyme, rosemary. Actually, I don't think we put basil in there. You can if you want. After I'm reading the recipe, it just calls for bay leaves, thyme, and rosemary. So if you put your basil in there, you can take it back out and save it, or leave a little in if you like the basil flavoring. You can't have too much of any of the herbs because it's just being infused into the recipe. Sorry about that. I should have read that a little more clear. Okay, so I got bay leaves, thyme, rosemary in my pan with my butter. I'm putting in 3/4 of a cup of butter. On top of that, and I'm sticking it on medium heat and melting it. And the reason why we're doing this first, because we want to melt it, which means we're going to have to stir it every once in a while. Okay. And once it's melted, we're just letting it sit. So put it on about a medium heat. Have some kind of spoon or spatula that you can just like turn it around a little bit with. But you're going to let that butter melt. And once it's melted, we're turning it off. While that starts to melt, you're going to get your other pan. And if we go to our watermelon salad, which is very glary, I know, when I hold it too far back, we're going to use a cup of balsamic vinegar or vinaigrette dressing. So I have a handy dandy cup measure. We know that with a cup measurer, it has a spout. You can sit it down, you can eyeball and see it as you go. Kind of watch your butter in the same process if you can. I'm going to pop the cap off of my balsamic so it comes out a little faster, because it just has that little spore spout. And I'm putting a cup of that in my measuring cup. Put it in my pan, because we're also going to put that on a burner here in a second. And I'm also, the recipe says for our balsamic over high heat, we're going to bring that to a boil. So go ahead and stick that on your burner. Stick that burner on high. To get it started, have some kind of whisk close by to that burner so you can whisk it as you go. And watch your butter while you're over here getting started. Mine is starting to melt quite well. And once that butter is completely melted, if you have a gas stove, you can just turn it off. If you have an electric stove, remove it from that burner. Okay, gas, the heat leaves immediately. With your electric, it tends to hold that heat in that burner a little while longer, and we just want it melted. As you start your balsamic, what our goal is with this balsamic is to reduce it down. So we're starting with a cup, and by the end, we're going to only have about a quarter cup of it. It's going to get a lot thicker. There is a cheat that you can use for this step as well, and I'll tell you that in just a second. I want to check my butter because once it's melted, I want to make sure I turn it off. What you'll notice is that your house will start smelling pretty good too, because those herbs are cooking just a little bit into the butter. I'm turning my butter off. The cheat I was telling you for the other thing, there's a thing that you can buy that's your balsamic glaze, which basically means it's already thickened for you. If you look at this, it has a very thick, I didn't open it up, but it's a very thick paste where your dressing's more runny. And this is already thickened for you and cooled down. It's quite more expensive, or a lot more expensive. So you want to make sure that, but it'll go a long way. I like to have this on hand because I like caprese salads. I like to take fresh tomatoes, fresh mozzarella cheese, basil, which is a good way to use your basil if you're growing basil as well, and just drizzle a little of this over it and serve it as a salad multiple times. So it's handy to have. But if you don't have it, you're doing exactly for this recipe what this recipe is calling for us to do. You're bringing that balsamic to a boil and you're letting it reduce down a little. Everyone's butter should be melted. Yes? How are we doing? I'm assuming everybody's doing okay. Nobody unmuted or said anything.
They're all busy working.
All right, so your butter should be melted. Just let it sit. And then my balsamic is about ready to boil right now. And it's to reduce it, I might turn it down just a smidge, but you're going to keep it at that kind of boil state. It'll take 5 to 10 minutes. So we might just come back and forth and check it a little bit as we go. If you've clicked on late, I'm going to tell you real quick, make sure your oven's on, make sure you preheated it to 350. Tony, I do not believe they have that glaze in Falmouth. I picked up that glaze at Walmart in Alexandria, and I have picked up that glaze before at Kroger's up in Cold Springs. I have not ever really looked for it in Falmouth, so I'm not for sure if it would be there or not. So your balsamic should be boiling, and your herbs and butter should be, your butter should be being infused with your herbs. And Jennifer, do you want to just talk a little bit about herbs and just in general and how
I sure will.
Why we use them some, so people can keep up with their balsamic and stuff as we're going?
All right, so I'm going to start with what are herbs and spices? So many people use the terms interchangeably to mean any product of plant origin used primarily for seasoning food. How's that for a definition? Technically, herbs come from the aromatic plants grown in the temperate zone, while spices are products of tropical plants. But we know a local farmer here in the county who grows ginger and turmeric, and my aunt up in Vermont grows saffron. So that doesn't necessarily hold true. It might be where they came from originally, but not where they grow now. Usually the leaves of herbs are used whereas spices may come from the bark, berries, flower buds, roots, or seeds. So in this recipe, or these recipes here, we're using the mint, we are using the leaves, the thyme, we're using the leaves. In the stuff we're using today, it's all herbs, not spices. If you were using ginger or cinnamon or nutmeg in something, that would be spices. If it was something more savory, not sweet, if you were using mustard seed or black pepper, anything along those lines, that would be a spice. Red pepper flakes are actually a spice, even though it's really just a vegetable that's been dried. So as herbs and spices are somewhat expensive, if you're not used to using herbs and spices, start with some of the basics like pepper, basil, oregano, cinnamon. My go-tos are Italian seasoning, which is a combination of basil, marjoram, oregano, thyme, and rosemary that you can find anywhere at the dollar store, at Wyatt's, at Walmart, you name it, and garlic powder. So that is a good combination that kind of goes with all kinds of things, from a pasta salad to steak to chicken to fish to whatever. My favorite herb to use is dill, because I'm a dill lover. It's a acquired taste. Not everybody likes dill, but dill pairs well with chicken and fish, as well as pickles and potato salad, things like that. All right, Kenna, do you need to take it back over?
No, yeah. How's everybody's balsamic doing? Boiling and hot to hold your little stirrer over on top of, right? I find reducing things sometimes not the most easiest process. They say, oh, it'll take about 10 minutes. And keep in mind, we're making this as a salad and we're putting it on top of our watermelon. And the reason why we wanted to do this first is because we also wanted to give it time to cool back down before we added it to our salad. Mine probably is about at half of what it was before. I'm not down to like just 3/4 of what it was. How's everybody else's doing? We're gonna give it a few more minutes. I'm actually gonna let it boil here in the pan for a few seconds without stirring it, but I want to go back and not forget to stir it because I want to proceed on with some of the things that we need to do. So while we're trying to keep up with that, our butter's going, I want you to start gathering all the other ingredients you're going to need for your bread. So we're going to put our wet and our dry and our ingredients together, and we're going to need lemon. So you should have got 2 lemons in your bag. You're going to eventually need your milk. Okay, so have your milk somewhere handy. You're going to need your flour and your sugar and your baking powder and your salt and your eggs. And hopefully you have your eggs and they have been sitting out at room temperature. A lot of times when we're baking, that's a key component that we don't always get. We decide we want to bake, and then all of a sudden our eggs are really cold. And almost any baking, if you can have your eggs at room temperature, it's much better for you to bake with. It's a better quality of the egg for you to be using in those products that you're making. Hopefully you had your eggs out. That was the only thing I told you, besides getting all your stuff together, that you needed to do ahead of time. With our lemons, we're going to start with our lemons. I got a small pan, yellow, so I remember it has my lemons in it because my brain don't work very well. We are going to need the zest from them as well as juice from them. I kind of gave you 2 in case you didn't get enough. You're going to use the zest. We're going to zest it first. There are a lot of options you can use for zesting. Find my little contraptions. I have this neat little contraption because my daughter likes to zest lemons a lot. It looks like this. You can zest on this side. Oops, dropped it. Juice with this side. Okay. I also have the zester I like to use, much bigger. If you don't have any of these handy dandy little gadgets, you can use one of these. Okay. I would not use the very fine, or you could, use whatever one you think works the best, but you can scrape it down the side of this. Use one of these, use something that looks like this. Because you see those holes look very similar to those holes, so it should do the same for you. So if you don't have a handy dandy zester, look for your cheese grater of whatever nature you have, and we're going to zest those lemons. I also think my balsamic is doing pretty good, so I'm going to turn my burner off. I have a gas stove, so I don't have to take it off of my stove. I'm just leaving it on there, but if you have an electric, you want to remove it from that heat. It has gotten a little thicker and it's reduced down quite a bit. Everybody else about in that same stage? If so, kind of give us thumbs up. Okay, that way we don't have to worry about it anymore. We can put it over, be done with it. And we're gonna move on to zesting. Hopefully, if you have not done so, just wash the outside of your lemon. Okay, we've had, you know, if your hands are clean, your hands on it are okay. A lot of different hands have been on it between Jennifer's and mine, bagging them up. And they've just been sitting in bags. So if you have not, wipe them down. If you have, good, because we're actually using part of that peel, where sometimes we don't think about that because we might not be using the outside. For our lemon zest, we need a tablespoon plus 1 teaspoon. So we need quite a bit. So you're gonna just start zesting away on that lemon. Okay. Do this one, it goes a little finer. So whatever you have, your hands are going to smell like lemons then. You're just going to keep on zesting. I'm zesting straight into the bowl that I'm going to mix the rest of my wet ingredients in. Because zest is kind of like anything else. If you like lemon, you can't have too much. If you don't like lemon, you have a little less. But what we're going to be pulling some of this out for is your icing that we'll put on it later on. How we doing? Anybody else have any fancy dancy thoughts for zesting on what works better for them, what they like to use, what they don't like to use?
They're all too busy zesting.
They're all too busy zesting. If you like a lot, you got 2 lemons. You can use some of each, or you can save your other lemon for your icing. A lot of times you got to run your finger on the back side of that zester as well to get all the good stuff off. And I would do that complete 1 lemon for sure with as much as we need. And so when you're done, you should have what I consider a naked lemon. Kind of like a naked lemon. If you wanted to skip the zesting part, you can buy lemon zest. Just know anything that you can use that's like more fresh always tends to be, in my opinion, a little better as well.
I agree with that.
Yeah. So after zest one whole lemon, I'm going to pull me out just a little bit. And I know I can always add more because I can always taste it. And I have a whole nother lemon I could use if I need to. But the recipe says we're gonna hold out a teaspoon of it for our icing. So I'm gonna pull about a teaspoon out of what I zested into my bowl. I'm putting it on just a little saucer, so I have it for later. Set it up in my windowsill and hope I don't spill it. Then I have my zest in my bowl. And I'm gonna add the rest of my wet ingredients. Everybody with me? If we're looking at the rest of the wet ingredients that we're having, we're mixing 3/4 cup of milk, a tablespoon of our lemon zest, and 1/4 cup of our juice. We're gonna work on my juice next because I have my lemon here naked still. You can, if you have a juicer, you can use something like this. I found this in the office today. I actually found this at the dollar store as well. Jennifer and I both looked at it and said, oh, what is this? And then I said, it has to be a juicer. So we tried it. Or you could just do it the old fashioned way and squeeze. You don't have to buy any fancy dancy gadgets if you do it that way. But what you're going to do is you're going to cut your lemon in half. Jennifer thought she read somewhere. What did you read somewhere, Jennifer, that you could do with it? Put it in a bag with a rolling pin, maybe?
Yeah, in a Ziploc, like a quart-sized Ziploc bag, and then push on it with a rolling pin. If you don't have the grip strength to do the type of zester, or sorry, the type of juicer that you just use in one hand, because that way you're putting pressure with your arms, not just your wrists.
What I like about one like this, and you can buy one that is attached with your measuring cup already, you can measure it straight in, but we're going to try to get to 1/4 cup. So I'm using this for the first one, and then I'll show you how this other one works here in a second. All of your pulp stays in the top part of that one, but half of it almost gives me 1/4 cup. On this one, and I did see them at the dollar store, you put it in opposite, and then you just use your muscles and squeeze. This one cost $6. This one was $1 at the dollar store, just so you know. But usually about a nice size, medium size lemon will give you about 1/4 cup of juice. So you might not need your second lemon, but I gave you 2 just in case you didn't quite get enough. And sometimes if you're making your icing, you might want to add a little of your lemon juice to that as well. So how are we doing? I got 1/4 cup. If I set it down, get down to eye level and look, I'm going to add it to my lemon zest. And then my other wet ingredient is 3/4 cup of whole milk. If you don't have whole milk, I'm assuming you can, I'm sure you can use 2%. It's just making it a little bit richer. So I stopped at the dollar store and bought a small, or no, I stopped at the gas station actually and bought a little whole milk, because whole milk's usually not found in my refrigerator. So you need 3/4 cup of whole milk. Wet measure for wet ingredients, right? I'm adding that to it. And I have my wet ingredients. Anything else wet going in there? If you have your recipe handy? I don't think so, right? Meanwhile, we're mixing milk, lemon zest, 1/4 cup. We're going to a medium. Do what?
What was that?
Do the eggs go in there? They're liquidy.
Nope, not yet.
Okay.
Sorry, good question though. That's all that's going in this bowl right now.
Is it 1/4 cup plus a tablespoon? Is that
Quarter,
right?
it's 1/4 cup of lemon juice.
Or 3/4 cup of milk? Is that right? Plus a
3/4.
tablespoon?
Your tablespoon is for your icing.
Oh,
Let's
okay.
put your 3/4 cup in it right now.
Okey-doke. Okay.
Because when we mix our powdered sugar and stuff for the icing, which will be the very last thing we do today, because it won't even go on our bread till it's.
Okay.
Okay, so we got that in this bowl. We're finding another bowl that's like medium-sized bowl. Okay, set that aside somewhere so I don't spill it. Next, we're mixing our dry ingredients. So we're doing flour, baking powder, and salt. If you were unable to find unsalted butter and you use salted butter, you can use a little less salt. I should have probably told you that in the butter phase, but with salt, if you use salted butter, just reduce your salt in your recipe a little bit. So I got my baking powder. I got flour. When you are measuring flour, if you have taken my class before, when we've done different things or listened to Lori Himmelsbach, she did a great demonstration of it for us. What methods do we use when we're measuring flour? Who can tell me? That means you got to unmute yourself and tell me. Nobody's going to be brave enough to tell
You
me.
use something you can level it off with.
You got to level it off, but I don't stick my 1 cup measure in there because how much flour do I need? 2 cups. I'm going to scoop.
Can I hold your cup down a little bit? We can't see, we only see your bowl. There you go.
Well, I didn't want to spill any in my bowl, but you're going to
I know.
and fill it, because what we tend to do is this isn't like brown sugar. We're not packing it in. And if you really want to be accurate, you put it on a scale and you weigh it. I think in one of our cooking through the calendar and one of the recipes I demoed, I showed the difference in it on how if I would have just stuck this. I'm sorry, let me put this up a little. If I would have stuck this whole cup into this bag and scooped it out or into my container that I might keep flour in, I would have had way too much. Then, Carol, I am leveling it off. So that's my 1 cup. Especially when you're baking, what you want to make sure you're doing is not packing that flour down, putting too much flour in it. Your bread will be dense, more dense the more you add. So you're doing the scoop and fill method. We're filling our cup. We're going to go a little higher because we want to fill it. I'm going to take a knife or whatever you have that's level. Get it all in X and crooning. And level it off. Dump it in my bowl. 2 cups worth.
Anna, I have a question. Why would you not sift it first?
Huh?
Why would you not sift the flour?
You can. I did not sift my flour.
But you don't have to.
You don't have to.
Okay.
It makes the flour lighter. Tends to make the bread a little lighter if you do. In the recipe, it just said whisk your flour after it's in you're whisking it together, which is also going to fluff it up a little bit as we go, since we did not sift it. Most recipes, if they really want you to sift it, will say sift your flour. Then to this dry ingredients, we're adding our baking powder, which is 2 teaspoons. Your baking powder sometimes has this nice little level, so you're doing kind of the same, leveling it off, dumping it in, leveling it off, dumping it in. 2 teaspoons. And then it calls for 3/4 of a teaspoon of salt. So I'm going to do a teaspoon. It says kosher salt. If you don't have kosher salt, you can use just regular salt. I'm using a little less because I have salted butter. So I'm only going to put about a teaspoon in instead of 3/4. Then you're taking that whisk and you're just kind of whisking it together. It lightens it up. It combines all of that baking powder with the flour and the salt. So now we should have a bowl of flour a bowl of butter, or not butter, a bowl of milk and lemon, a pan of butter with our herbs in it. And then we're finding our next size bowl. And that's where our next ingredients go. How's everybody keeping up?
Everybody
somebody-
seeing thumbs up.
Somebody would yell if they're not. Okay, in this bowl, we are putting our eggs and our sugar. When you're cracking your egg, don't crack it on the side of your bowl, crack it on your counter. And put 2 eggs in. Your eggs should have been at room temperature. Those out of my way. Then we're adding 2 eggs and we need 3/4 cup of sugar. Sugar is kind of the same way as the flour. You're going to scoop it into your container as well. I need a bigger counter, just for the record.
Most of us do, don't we?
Yeah. So I got a 3/4 cup measure. If you don't have a 3/4 cup measure, you're going to use a 1/2 and a 1/4. And I'm scooping it just like I did the flour. And I'm also going to find back my knife and level it back off. Now we're all going to get noisy. Because after we have our sugar and our eggs in our bowl, we're going to use our handy dandy mixer. If you had a mixing stand, it said you could have used that. If you're mixing with your hand, you're going to be mixing for a while. So hopefully you have an electric mixer. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to mix the egg and sugar in a bowl until it's about double in size. So everybody's going to get noisy. So everybody find your mixer. Everybody start mixing it. It says on medium heat, medium speed. Sometimes I'll start on medium speed when I get impatient because it's not going fast enough. I guess I should say I'm using my whip blade. If you don't have a whip blade, these blades are fine. Okay, I'm just using my whip blade. And we're gonna keep with it until it gets light in color and double in size.
Second helicopter just landed, 1912.
I don't see that anybody's unmuted. I don't know where that came from.
Go ahead, 29.
How's it looking, Jennifer?
Everybody looks like they're kind of, some are still beating, some seem to be done.
Okay.
All right. If you guys are all done beating, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I see 5 thumbs ups.
That's good. That's not everybody though.
No, some people don't have their cameras on though.
Yeah. You're gonna get that light fluffy looking color if you can kind of see it. It's hard to see. And it's foamy or a little bit foamy. We need to know everybody's good and ready to move on. So I'm not trying to talk over you beating.
If anyone's still beating, I don't know if they'd hear us ask.
Yeah. All right, I'm gonna say everybody's like Kenna and I've beaten it long enough and you're ready to move on.
All right,
You
I see
hear
some
me.
saying all good, ready. So,
Okay. So after we have, we use the electric mixer, we beat in our eggs and our sugar until they're light in color. We're gonna discard the herbs from our butter, then beat the butter into our egg mixture. Now, we'll tell you what Kenna found out when she made this recipe that was she wished she would have done. I'm gonna use this little strainer to get mine into my pan. You can kind of just pick your herbs out with this, let them drip off, and discard them this way as well. But I don't know if I would totally get rid of them yet. So I'm gonna just stick mine in here for now, kind of let the butter run through. I can set that on my thing and even scrape more of it out of my pan as I'm going. So you want to get as much of the butter off of them as you can, but none of the herbs into your recipe. If that makes sense, if you can avoid it. I dropped a few in. I'm going to put these herbs back in my pan though, because I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do with them. Because when I made this the last time practicing for the class, I'm like, man, I wish I had some of that butter. Because what you'll find out is, whoops, that wasn't good. I have too many utensils. What you find out is that there's different ways you can preserve or keep herbs after you use them. And one of the things that you can do is you can incorporate them into butters and freeze them. But then you can also, I thought if I put more butter into that with the herbs, even a few more if I want it, take the herbs out, then let the butter harden back on. I'm thinking that'd be good on any vegetable. And it's gonna add,
it's real good.
I think that would be good brushed on my corn on the cob that I'm gonna have over the weekend.
Or a dinner roll.
Or a
You're
dinner
on
roll.
that too.
Or cornbread.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm gonna kind of leave them in there. I'll probably melt more butter with them later on this evening. And then take the herbs out, let the butter rehard to use it for something else. So we added our butter. We're gonna mix it up a little bit. After you mix it up a little bit, you should look more smooth in your pan. And then we are adding to that half of our dry ingredients. So just sprinkle about half of our dry. So it says, add half your dry ingredients and beat until combined, then we're adding our wet ingredients of our milk, then we're adding the rest of our dry. So we're just going to go through those steps right now and mix as we go. I did my first batch of dry. I'm adding my wet and splashing everywhere.
And that's really gonna affect the texture of your loaf that you're making. If you were to add all the dry and then all the wet together, then you're not gonna get it as light and fluffy as when you do it in stages like the recipe calls for.
We're not really over mixing. We're just mixing it enough that we're blending it together. And then now I'm adding the rest of my dry. I'm gonna scrape my edges and mix it one more time, and then we should be good. Really important that you don't overmix, and it's really important when you're baking, you follow the directions. Remember, I always tell you, and you've done cooking classes with me before, there's a big difference between cooking and baking. You have a little more flexibility and liberty when you're cooking. When you're baking, follow the recipe. All right, everybody here, everybody has everything mixed.
Most people seem to be looking at the camera.
Okay. If you read the recipe next, it says we're going to pour half our batter into the prepared pan. Then you're going to take your jam, whatever you chose. It said strawberry. I made it with strawberry the last time. This time I'm going to make it with seedless blackberry, just to be different. So we're putting half of our batter into our pan. And you're just eyeballing it. Your pan should already have been prepared. Your pan should be ready to go. Got your parchment paper in it. Half of it. You just got to eyeball and hope it's half. Then it's saying after you got half of it in there, you're putting 3 tablespoons of the jam. I'm just using a regular spoon. And I'm just going to plop a little bit of the jam in a few different places. And you're going to take your knife and swirl it. This paper is sticking up, so you really can't see it. So you're just kind of swirling that jam into the batter. And then you're putting the rest of your batter. And you're doing the same thing again. Can you smell the lemon and the herbs in your batter? Hopefully you can. I can here.
I'm seeing some heads nodding.
And we're doing that 3 more scoops. And swirling it in. I think this would have been good with peach. Jennifer makes an apricot. I think it'd been really good with apricot.
I would.
I think it'll be good if you bought the strawberry. You can just be a little creative. I would tell you to lick your knife, but I can't tell you that because there's raw eggs in the batter. It's food safety no-no. So don't,
And flour. They say flour now is a cause of all that stuff too.
just saying. Can't try it as much as you might want to and as much as you maybe did when you were a kid. Hey, that's what mine looks like. How's everybody else's looking? Take a picture.
Can anybody show theirs to the camera so we can see what they look like? Ah, that one looks good, Tammy. Very good, Nicole. Thank you. And Andrea, thank you.
All right, after we got this much done, says it goes in the oven for 50 to 60 minutes. If you're using that little bit larger pan and it's thick, a little bit thicker, I might set it for 45. I always go for the lowest time they recommend and then test it. So if you have a little bit larger, you might want to set your timer for 45. If you have the normal, the 8.5 by 4.5 loaf pan, I'm going to set my timer for 50 minutes. Okay. Stick her in the oven. Goes on a middle rack. And I'm going to set my timer on my phone for 50 minutes. And everybody should be at that stage, hopefully.
The people I can see seem to be yes. They're picking up dirty dishes.
All right. We got to get all those dirty dishes out of the way. We got to find a knife and another bowl and start on our watermelon. Everybody good? Everybody in the oven?
If anybody's not ready to move on, can you let us know?
Okay, I'm gonna go with everybody's good.
Yep, looks like it.
All right. So we're moving on to our, let me wash my hands real quick because I got a bunch of sticky on it. I'm gonna cut my watermelon last. That's just me because I don't want my cutting board all juicy. And because everything that I am doing, there's no raw meat, nothing else involved. I can do it all on the same cutting board. So I just want to save the juiciest for last. So I'm going to go in stages. Okay. So I'm going to actually start with my herbs, which maybe might sound backwards, but I want to get my herbs prepared. And if I got to do anything on my cutting board, I want to have that kind of out of the way. Then I'm going to move on to my red onion. And then I'm going to move on to my watermelon. Make sense? Okay. Watermelon. If we're talking about our herbs, we should have mint. We should have basil, thinly sliced. And we should have thyme. A tablespoon of thyme. All right. I don't know how this handy dandy gadget's gonna work that I gave you, but we're gonna see. Okay, and if it don't work, it's gonna be, you know, one of those as seen on TV fails. Some of you might remember I did a class like that a long time ago. Do we really want it? As seen on TV. Okay, this little gadget is supposed to strip your herbs. Supposed to. You can actually do it with your hands as well, but when you look at thyme, thyme is all on your stem like this. We're not putting the whole stem in the salad because that would be a little too crunchy and they'd have to pick it out. What we really want off of that is these little green things. So if I was going to do this with my hand, I'm just going to strip it backwards, which I have a feeling is going to be a lot easier and quicker. But we're going to try this thing since I gave it to you and it came in your nice little packet. If you're using this, you're going, Flo, it should be wrapped in that black thing. Everyone should have had one. If you didn't get one, sorry, I have more. Okay, we might have just missed your bag when we filled it, but it's in that black wrapped up paper. So basically what you're supposed to do is put this in the hole, and I'm going to use the smallest hole since it's thyme. And you're supposed to do the same thing as if you were doing it with your fingers. It's like threading a needle though. Somebody like Kay probably should have to thread it for me because I'm terrible at threading a needle. And you just pull it through, and half of them stay on. So I'm going to use my hands, but that's the concept of what you're supposed to use. I did it with the rosemary earlier, just practicing. It did pretty good with the rosemary, but that has a little bit more, leaves on it that you're trying to get. So basically you're taking that thyme and what you have, and you're going to strip those little pieces off of it. I'm doing it on a paper plate. It calls for 2 tablespoons, whatever you get. It's kind of like seasonings. If you don't like a seasoning, what do we do, Jennifer?
Leave it out and try to think of something else to use in its place.
Yep. We just substitute it or leave it out. Rosemary, I like on some things. Thyme, yeah, I'm a hit or miss sometime on thyme. So I'm just stripping off some of these. You strip off what you have. If you used some in your other, you might not have a whole lot. If you grow some, you might have some more out in your garden. You can add to it later. You can always add dry thyme for this as well. But just remember, fresh is better. And usually when you're substituting dry for fresh, it'll tell you on the container the substitution rate.
I actually have numbers for that. So a general rule of thumb is that 1/4 teaspoon of powdered is equivalent to 3/4 to 1 teaspoon of dried, which is equivalent to 1 tablespoon of fresh. So if you think 1/4 to 1 teaspoon to 1 tablespoon is kind of a rule of thumb if you're mixing those up.
Okay, everybody kind of got whatever time they had left, and just use what you have left for this on your thing. Then we have mint. Now, I'm sorry guys on how some of your herbs look, but it's the best we could give. So I'm going to break leaves off because I picked some fresh mint. I'm very thankful that my mom and my sister keep up with the herbs, and we had some. So if you have some, you can add, use what I have. The mint you got looks very limp, but it'll still add some flavor. And now I'm going to try those handy dandy scissors, Bethany, that you were so excited to get. Because basically with your mint, you're just going to like cut it up as well. Same with your basil when we get to it. So your scissors, I've used them with chives before, because I've had a pair. Was the gadget I got everybody for Christmas one year. My kid wise, I'm sure they were thrilled. They got herb scissors. But this one came with this little spoon or a fork or pick or whatever, so it helps get them out of where you cut them. So they're just putting them in those, I never say the word right. Chavant, how do you say it, Jennifer? Chavant, those little, Kathy Burns would know how I would say it. Chavant, what are those called? Somebody smarter than Kenna that pronounces words.
Isn't it chiffonade?
Chiffonade, yes.
There you go. I wasn't sure what you were talking about.
Yeah, on how you're supposed to cut them. So they're those nice little strips. So I'm going
There
to do
you go.
that with my mint, and I'm going to do that with my basil. Hey, and Bethany, these work pretty well for this. So when you're doing them, they basically say you roll the leaves, and if you were using a knife, you're cutting them in little strips. So find some basil. You're going to do the same with your basil, and then we'll have all of our herbs cut, and we'll move on to our onion. Basil, we're supposed to have a 1/4 cup or whatever you have. Know that as you make your salad, if you go out and you have more and you can pick more, you can always add a little more tomorrow. So I'm doing the same. I kind of rolled up my basil and I'm cutting it with my scissors. On your basil and your mint, you're mainly using the leaves. Or you are using the leaves, I guess I should say, not mainly.
You got a little bit of stem in there, that'd be okay, because it's a nice
Yeah,
soft
it's not going to
stem.
hurt you, right? But that's what you're looking at, especially if you get like a clump that came together like this, which is probably what most of yours look like that I gave you. Basil is you either like it or you don't like it kind of flavor. If you don't like it, don't put much in it. If you like it, add more. This salad, I don't think you could have too much of anything. So I got a nice little plate of herbs by the time I'm done. How's everybody doing on their herbs? About there?
Looks like a lot of people are still cutting.
Okay, I'll give you a few more minutes. While we're waiting, Jennifer, anything tidbit of information you want to pass on to them about herbs?
Well, as we were talking about like the dry versus the fresh versus the powdered, dried is more potent because the flavors get concentrated as it dries. But as Kenna was mentioning, fresh is always better because the nutritional value is going to be better in the fresh. Just because things as they dry out, they lose some of their nutritious content just as things evaporate. So if you can get fresh, that's good. We put some seeds in a pot in your bags to go home with you. So you could grow some on your windowsill. Some things don't do well inside, like rosemary and thyme, because they have woody stems. So something like that you would not really want to grow inside. But any of your basil or things like that, marjoram, parsley, those things you can easily grow indoors all year round and have it fresh whenever you want it.
I have grown rosemary indoors before. It's not the most friendly to do, but
Right.
that I have.
And people with green thumbs could probably get anything to grow indoors. Those
Yeah.
of us who don't, we have to pick and choose.
Yeah. One thing that you'll notice even too with herbs, if you're planting them, some herbs will take over the world. So a lot of things, and I think that maybe Lindy taught this. Some of you maybe took the herb growing class. Didn't she have that back a while ago?
Yes.
Sometimes if you plant them in a pot in the ground, it keeps the roots bound so they don't spread out as much as well.
Correct. And then things like rosemary, that's really a tropical plant. While they do overwinter here in Kentucky, they need to be in a protected area, like closer to your house. Or if they're not, like say they're out in a raised bed or out in the yard somewhere, if you mulch them good with leaves or straw, then that will help keep that ground a little bit warmer so that they'll survive the winter.
Yep. And we were gonna tell them something about dill. I don't know if dill was in their bag or not. What we-
Yep, there are dill seeds in some of your all's bags. Dill is something that you want to plant in the fall or even this time of year, because naturally, as the dill plant is growing and the seeds are ripening, the wind's going to blow them off and they're going to plant themselves in the ground. So if you have a spot where you're not going to be mowing or doing something like that, go ahead and sprinkle your dill seeds anytime in the now to the next couple months, and they'll overwinter and then they'll come up in the spring, and that'll do it much better than if you try to put them out, sprinkle those seeds in the spring.
All right, very good. Okay, we got our herbs done. Everybody doing pretty good?
Everybody looks like they're looking at the camera again, so we should be good.
Are we ready to cry? All right, we need half of a red onion. Okay, multiple times in multiple cooking classes, I've told you guys how to cut an onion. Okay, multiple times we have covered this, and the quickest way to keep us most from crying, who can remember? Who can tell me how they think they do it? What's the first thing I do to my onion?
I don't see anybody unmuting. Shall I call on somebody?
Come on, I feel like I haven't been that bad of a teacher over there. We started out with Chef showing us how.
Carol's smiling. Carol? Let me see if I can unmute her now that I've got her muted. What, have you got an answer for us,
She has to
Carol?
unmute herself. They can only unmute themselves.
Okay,
Cut a flat spot, Sandy said. Okay, but what side am I cutting the flat spot? Not on this side, not on this side.
You do it on the end, yeah.
The stem, not the root.
Yeah.
Right? I cut a little bit off the stem on this side.
thank you, Carol.
And I have this nice kind of flat, setting it this way, and I'm cutting the onion exactly in half. Okay, I can bridge over it, protect my fingers, cut right through the middle of the root and bridge over it. I have 2 halves. I'm only using half. Don't have to worry about anything else, and I'm not doing anything with the root end yet. Now I'm peeling it, taking all this off. Just that outside peel. Sometimes 2 layers come off, sometimes whatever you think to get that outside peel off. Okay, you should have a outside peeled onion. Now, we're taking our knives and we are cutting we're cutting back to the root in angles. So we're kind of going sideways and in, or if you turn it this way, put your tip back by the root and go out. Okay, whichever way is easiest for you, but you're just cutting angles down, but not cutting all the way through to the root. We're holding our knife firm. Some of mine come apart when I do it, but I do the best I can. So you have, if you pulled this all apart, it's still all connected by the root. Okay. Then I'm holding it this way. I'm putting my hand flat on top of it, and I'm going straight in through the side I cut off the top side. Still going back to my root. So now I have this nice little fan, if I fanned it out, of my onion. And then I'm going this motion back, curling my fingers and chop it. All the way back so we get to that root, and all you have left is the root. Kind of remember now, it's not as chopped as fine as you want. Rock over it some, chop it a little finer. Got a half onion cut pretty quickly without crying. Right? How they doing, Jennifer?
Some are still cutting. I can see arms are moving.
The recipe said thinly slice them. I'm gonna make this as a salad and mix it all together instead of making it a pretty presentation on the plate, which is an option as well. That's why I chopped mine. And that's the way why I told you to chop yours as well. Because chances are you're not just gonna sit down and give it to somebody and eat it tonight. So I'm gonna go ahead after I get this done and put my onions in my bowl. So it's out of my way from my watermelon. Half of that onion in the bowl. If you like a lot of red onion, use the rest of it. And we're gonna move on to our watermelon. And I really hope these are good on the inside. Everybody good with their onion?
It looks like everybody's done chopping.
On your watermelon. We're gonna cut off both ends of our watermelon. Then we're gonna stand it up and pull the skin off. First, we're gonna do one side. Helps if you have a good sharp knife. If you remember when we did the knife safety, you can take your knives into Wyatt's, they'll sharpen them for you. The most dangerous tool in the kitchen is a dull knife. So keep your knives good and sharp. I got both sides off. Now I'm just gonna kind of go down the edge of my watermelon and peel it all the way around. It says somewhere the heavier the watermelons are, the juicier they are. So if you're picking up watermelons at the store and trying to figure out which one's right, I'm not ever a good judge at that because one, I don't like watermelons. So I don't. But I did read that the heavier they are, it usually means the juicier they are. Anybody have any good tips for picking out a good ripe watermelon?
Oblong.
Oblong?
Watermelons are sweeter.
Mom, you're muted.
No, I'm not.
Oh.
Oblong, and the more webbing and the yellower the spot,
Okay.
the better they are.
Interesting. Thank you.
Hey, remember we had a naked lemon? We should now have a naked watermelon. And what we're gonna do with our watermelon is cube it. So the next step I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut it in half using that flat edge so I don't have anything round rolling around. I'll set it down. I'm gonna do the same concept as the
Onion.
onion. I'm gonna cut it in half this way. I'm gonna leave it stacked. Then I'm gonna cut it this way and this way. And then hopefully I have nice little cubes that's going to go in my salad. I'll flip it, keeping it all together. And I have these nice little cubes of watermelon, and I'm just going to pick up and toss into my bowl over here. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the other side. Cut it in half. It's pretty juicy. My cutting board's getting pretty juicy.
Mhm.
Saved it till the end to do. I got the rest of my little cubes and I'm gonna stick it in my bowl. How are we doing? How are watermelons coming, Jennifer?
People seem to still be cutting the second half.
Okay. This isn't as fun as when I have the chef teach and I can just watch and monitor the screen. I'm gonna have a bunch of dirty dishes to do.
Right?
This is all said and done.
And here I'm wishing I could be chopping watermelon because that looks really good instead of sitting here watching the screen.
Yep.
But yeah, I'll leave the dishes with you.
That's why we like these virtual classes, because all the mess is in everybody else's kitchen.
Right?
And then you have a whole recipe that you get to eat. I'm gonna toss my onion and my watermelon together just a little bit, because I'm making it as a, not as a presentation, as a salad in a bowl. Okay. Can't say that my balsamic is super thick, but it's still going to be a dressing that's going to go on it. Everybody, watermelon done?
I'm seeing watermelon in bowls.
Okay, then you should have had your plate of herbs or whatever you cut your herbs on. So I'm just going to toss them in. And I'm going to mix them in as well. There's a couple plated up recipes we stuck in your bags as well. I don't know if there is a watermelon tomato based
Salsa.
recipe, I think, that's really good. That's one of our plated up ones as well. This one had a few more herbs in it. That's why I picked this one with the mint and the thyme as well. So I'm getting on some green flakes and pretty. Wanted to show you, if it possibly can. This is my balsamic vinaigrette. Can't see it. I'm in a dark pan. I can't say it's super thick. Did anybody else's end up super thick? But it has been reduced down. If I was using this, the glaze, you can see I'm gonna, well, let me go down here. Watch how it comes out. It comes out super thick.
Oh, a drop at a time, huh?
Yeah. So it is definitely a lot thicker than what I ended up with in my pan. Not that that makes a difference. I think it's a dressing that's going on it, and you can put balsamic on it that even hasn't been reduced when you make salad sometimes. So the next thing it says that we're doing after we do our cucumbers and our onions and our herbs. We're going to drizzle the balsamic over it, and it's going to mix together as well. If you think you have more of the balsamic than you need, only put about half in it. Be your own judge of that. Sometimes I'd rather start with less and add more if it needs it. It doesn't take a lot to just moisten up and add a little flavor. I only put about half of mine in it, but you can decide for yourself based on how. That's kind of what it looks like. If people want to show me what theirs looks like. And you're gonna put it in the refrigerator and serve it whenever you want to serve it, or try it. You could actually try a bite of it and eat it
Right.
right now if you want it. I
would think with the onions in it, I know that this is an evening class, but it would be something that would be good to make an hour or two before you would eat it and not let it sit for 2 days, because that onion would kind of overpower things.
Right. And you could always have everything together in it and add the onion later.
Correct.
And if you like onion, that might not bother you at all. Okay. that I'm setting aside for now. Either way, I'll put it in the refrigerator later. The only other thing that we have to kind of make, and we'll see how we're doing, and actually our Brett should be doing pretty good. Mine still, for the first go around, has 20 more minutes. But we're gonna make the glaze that's gonna go on top of it, or I'm at least gonna talk you through making the glaze, not that it can't sit for a little bit. But you don't wanna put your glaze on your bread until after it cools down. If you're not a huge glaze fan, you don't want glaze, I guess you don't have to, but you know, glaze makes everything taste better. But pretty much the only thing you're doing for the glaze is whisking together the powdered sugar, which calls for a half a cup of powdered sugar. You're mixing the rest of that zest that you had from your lemon. Okay, so you're mixing the powdered sugar, a tablespoon of your milk, the zest from your lemon, you're mixing it in a small bowl, and then you're just drizzling it on your cake or on your loaf after it cools down. So we might not make that quite yet because you're going to have a little bit of time before your loaf is even going to be cool enough to put on the top of it. And with it having milk in it, you don't want to set it in the refrigerator, let it get to, you could, but basically you'll have that tablespoon of milk, your zest, and your powdered sugar that you're going to add to make that glaze to go on your loaf. So questions. What do you want to, now's your time. What do you want to ask us that we may or may not know about herbs? Maybe we should let Jennifer finish telling us anything that she had wrote notes on. You might want to share with us.
I can add a little more here. So in your bags, you had some handouts that list herbs by different categories, as well as some pairing charts. And I gave you more than one pairing chart just because if you notice, they're different. So depending on what people like, they pair things differently. So none of these are the Bible. This is just flavors that tend to go well together. And so it's on your own taste palette and what you like. So these are just some ideas to get you started. There's also the sodium-free flavoring tips in there, as well as a Penn State handout that have some flavoring blends that you can put together and have on hand so that instead of buying something pre-made, you can use your own herbs and spices to do that. So if you are growing your own herbs and you want to then preserve them to use later, there's some good tips on that I have here. So when you harvest herbs, you want to be looking for most herbs you want to do just before the flowers open. So take basil as an example. Once the basil starts flowering at the top, then it starts to get a little bit more bitter. So usually basil is not ready. Say when tomatoes are, and fresh basil is good in tomato sauce. So one thing you can do is pick those flowers off, and that way you're going to extend the life of that flowering plant a little bit longer without the flowers setting. So therefore you can use it fresh longer through the summer, but then when it gets to the point where you want to get it inside to dry it, a lot of herbs are very easy to just pick that whole herb, hang it upside down, take a bunch of them, not too tightly packed together, but just tie string around it and hang it on the porch or somewhere where the breeze can blow it a little bit. Or if you have air conditioning inside, the humidity is a little bit lower, so that's going to help it dry. But a lot of times it's easier just to air dry it that way. If you want to do it in a quicker fashion, you can do it in a dehydrator or in your oven. And when you're getting things ready for drying, make sure you remove anything that looks bruised already, soiled, anything that looks like a bird poop or insect eggs or anything like that, because you don't want to be adding that to what you're keeping on hand. Some herbs you could rinse a little bit, but I typically don't unless it looks dirty. It's always good to do it a little bit after a rain, and that way you know it's going to be a little bit cleaner and you don't have to wash it yourself. If it's a hardier thing like the thyme or the rosemary, they can just kind of stay on the stem for a while. And then when you have a chance, just like you did today, just take them off that stem and put them in an airtight container. So the biggest thing with as you're storing them is to make sure it is airtight and also bug tight. Because you don't want either of those things. They would ruin the how your herbs are being kept, and they're going to either get moldy or have insects in them if you don't do that. So you can dry them out in the sun. Some things work okay that way. Most of us don't do that anymore, but something they certainly have done in the past. Some things like dill that you want the seeds, like the dill, my dill is just gone to seed recently. So you pick those flower heads off once the seeds are dry naturally, and before the wind blows them all away, and put them in a paper bag, and that way let it dry out a little bit more that way. And then you can shake it in the paper bag and it will come off of those little stalks. And then you're going to transfer that from the paper bag, put the seeds into a smaller airtight container. Now, when you're storing them, make sure it is out of direct sunlight, away from heat and moisture. So do not keep them over your stove. Do not keep them on a spice rack right by your stove, or some people line them up on their stove. That's not a good idea because it's going to make them go bad or lose their flavor quicker. When you have your herbs that are that you've had for a while, herbs stay for a long time quite fresh. But you want to check them every now and then and make sure that they still have some good smell, some good taste to them. So if it's something like basil or dried basil, something like that, 2 or 3 times a year, take a little bit out if you're not using it on a regular basis, kind of crush it in your hand and smell. And if it's still nice and poignant, then you know it's still okay. If you're not smelling much, get rid of it and get some new stuff. Another rule of thumb that we had for using spices when we're cooking. So both of these things, we were using it right away. And so we didn't need to worry about when we were putting it in because we were baking it or we were adding it to the salad. But if you're making a stew or you're making a roast or something like that, whole spices are better when it's got longer cooking time, because then that is going to take longer to infuse the spice into it. So that would be like coriander and cumin and mustard seed and pepper. So if it's more of a dried herb, you want to add it in the last 45 minutes or so, unless you're marinating it with it to grill or something like that. Or you could put some of it in to begin with, so those flavors infuse a little bit better, but then add some in the last 15 to 20 minutes of cooking so that it enhances the flavor a little bit more. For cold foods, add herbs several hours or overnight ahead of time, such as things like dips, dressings, cold vegetable dishes, like this watermelon salad, that you want time for that flavor to get absorbed into that dish. And then until you're familiar with the flavor and strength of an herb or spice that you don't know, add just a little bit and then add more the next time you make it if you want some more flavor. All of our tastes are a little bit different. So when pairing spices with food, rely on what you like, not necessarily what paperwork tells you to do. Since I'm a dietitian, I got to throw a little bit of the nutritional value in there. Some websites out there claim that there's no nutritional value in herbs and spices. However, that's not true. All green herbs and many of the spices, so green herbs being your basil, marjoram, oregano, parsley, cilantro, things like that, as well as your cinnamon and nutmeg and those types of spices are all good sources of calcium. So those of us who don't drink enough milk or eat enough cheese, adding spices and herbs to what we're cooking is helping us get some calcium in there. All of the herbs contain potassium, and then many contain other vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals as well. So they're not just adding flavor, they are actually adding some nutritional value to our food. There's many good books out there about herbs and their healing properties. So I got a little bit of information just from Nourish by WebMD, which is a website. When you're looking on the internet, make sure it's a trusted source and not just somebody's blog that they might not really know what they're talking about. So thyme that we put in our recipe is actually part of the mint family. Not that it tastes anything like mint does it, and it's much woodier, but it's part of the mint family. And it contains something called thymol, which is a compound found to help with bacterial, parasitic, fungal, and viral infections. Thyme also contains vitamins A and C as well as magnesium. Rosemary that we put in this dish is actually an evergreen shrub that I said is tropical. It's an antioxidant, an antibacterial, an antiviral, and antifungal. And it contains manganese, pantothenic acid, niacin, thiamine, folate, and riboflavin. So these are some of our B vitamins that we don't get unless we're eating meat. So the fact that some of these herbs actually have that is good. All of these things are water soluble, these B vitamins. So they're better to use if you're roasting or grilling or pan frying, as they'll use some of their nutritional value if they're in something that you're then draining off the liquid. Bay leaves that we had in this have antibacterial properties. But since we don't usually eat the bay leaf, we usually take it out. We don't really get much nutrition from the bay leaf. We're just getting the flavor. Some places, some parts of the world, they actually crush a bay leaf and eat it. That would be a little potent for me. Basil is native to India, Asia, and Africa, but it's now grown worldwide. There's more than 60 varieties of basil, with sweet basil being the one that were most common around here. There's antioxidants of lutein, zeaxanthin, beta carotene, and beta cryptoxanthin, which all help with oxidative stress. So the more that we don't move around, the more that we're couch potatoes, the more junk food we eat, there's more oxidative stress on our bodies. So when we have things that are antioxidants, then it helps us to be healthier. It helps get rid of some of those bad things in our body. They're also key nutrients for our eyes. Basil also contains vitamins A and K, which are fat soluble vitamins. So something like this herb infused bread where you've got the butter in there, that's a good thing because it needs that fat to help it be absorbed. It also has manganese, magnesium, iron, zinc, and potassium. So add fresh basil toward the end of cooking to preserve as many of these as you can. Ginger, we had a little bit of. It's a spice from the root of the ginger plant. And as I said, we have a local farmer here who grows it. So it can be grown in this area. Next month's Cooking Through the Calendar, we'll be talking more about ginger. So I won't mention it too much here. But there's lots of ways to get ginger, whether you buy the root and kind of grind it up a little bit, chop it like for an Oriental dish, ground ginger like we would put in gingerbread and muffins and things. And candied ginger is an up and coming thing that's added to some baked goods and cheeses nowadays, and it's actually quite tasty itself. We all know of ginger's nausea relief properties, but the only nutrients really in ginger, since it's more of a root and not the leaf that gets the good vitamin C, is a little bit of iron and just a little bit of vitamin C. We had vanilla in our recipe. It's a natural extract from a vanilla bean pod. But you only get the nutritional value if you're using real vanilla, not the artificial. So synthetic vanilla is actually made from wood pulp and coal tar, which I'd rather not eat myself. So I spend all the extra money and get the actual real vanilla. So vanilla itself, the real stuff, provides calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, and potassium. And I'm also going to mention sodium real quick because we use salt in our recipe. And while most people get too much sodium in the diets, it is needed in small amounts. All salt originally came from the sea, whether we're dehydrating sea or ocean water, or if it's in a salt lick, it was all sea at one point in time. And so that's where all salt is actually sea salt. So a lot of health claims on things don't really amount to much. So salt is salt, whether it came from the Himalayas or wherever. Some places like the Himalayan pink sea salt does have a little bit of a mineral in it that makes it pink, but not enough that's going to change any nutritional content of it. So the big thing we need to remember with salt is that we really need to buy the iodine in the salt because our bodies need iodine and we don't get it in any other way. It's an additive to salt. It's not part of salt, but they add it because our thyroid need iodine. So unless we're eating fish every day, which is not good for us anymore because of mercury levels and such, there's no other way to get iodine in our diet. So sodium is needed, but in small amounts. Typically when I am cooking, I try to not use much salt at all. I rely on herbs and spices. When you're baking, you do need a little bit of salt because it's going to help things rise. But a lot of times you can get away with not quite as much as the recipe calls for. So I think that's all that I had. Any questions for us?
Now's your time to hit us up. If you got a question. Remember, I did tell you, like with the butter, that
I have one question. If you didn't want to air dry it, can you put it in the oven at a real low temperature, or is that bad to do?
No, you can do that and then just kind of make sure you keep an eye on it because once it starts to dry, that's when you want to take it out. And typically the lowest possible setting on your oven, some ovens go down to 200, some only go down to 250.
Okay.
But the lowest that you can get it. And then typically for about an hour or so is how long it will take. But again, depends on how much moisture is in it when you put it in the oven. So keep a good eye on it because you don't want to over dry it or it's just not going to have very good texture or flavor.
And as a rule of thumb, is it usually good for about a year? I mean, if you're drying your own and putting it, okay.
Correct. But a lot of times it will last a little bit longer if you keep it in good conditions.
Okay.
remember you can freeze it. You can freeze it in the butter. I'm using the rest of my herbs, put some more butter in it, take them out, use them for other things as well. It will keep a while in my refrigerator. Anything else? I have down, and we're not going to wait till our bread is done because even though I have like 6 or 7 minutes left on my loaf, it might go back in for another 10. So hopefully, and you all better do it, I want to see pictures on Facebook of finished loaves. I want to hear how it turned out, how you liked it. I want to hear what you think of your watermelon salad when you eat it as well. Okay? Any other questions?
We have in the chat, someone says they live 45 miles away. Is there any way they can get the package sent to their home?
We will not mail them. I'm sorry. It's just not, and even when I find out, and we're giving fewer and fewer items out in the bags. So it's just too, I mean, it's already, no, we cannot. I'm sorry.
Now, we could probably send them the paperwork that was in it.
Yes. I am
So
going to
if they
attach the
would
paperwork
email
to an
us-
email.
Yep.
Yeah, or mail it if you want some of that handouts mailed to you as well. Most of the handouts we put in the bag are cooperative extension handouts that we can either share via a link with you and or mail. So if that's something you would like, yes, but some of the supplies for the class, not necessarily, like food supplies, I guess I should say. Any of those non-food supplies we could probably help and assist with. And when you sign up, please let us know if you're getting a bag or not getting a bag. That way we know, we know who's not getting a bag and we don't prepare more than we need. Okay. Anything else? Our next class, hopefully, I forgot to put that in your bag. Hopefully you got that in your email, is Buckeyes and Brittle. Lori Hemmelsbach is going to be teaching that. So the first part of November, we're going to get you ready to make your goodies for the holidays. So we're going to be doing Buckeyes and Brittles. She's going to take Brittle up a notch. I don't know what she's going to do, but I've ate some pretty good Brittle over my time. So I hope she does something fancy with us.
Do you think you'll record that also?
We will record. Yes. All sessions I record and I send out to everybody who signed up for them. So, all right, guys. Thanks. Hope your bread turns out good. Send me pictures.
Thank you.
Have
Thank
a
you.
good night.
Thank you.
Great class.
I'm going to wish
Thanks.
Grandma was over here doing my dishes. Or Mom. I see people doing dishes in their house. Got a lot to do.
Thank
See
you,
you
Kenna.
later.
This is Donna and Leanne.
All right. Have a good night.
Good night.
All right. Good
Thank
night.
you.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Kenna, someone said maybe a soup and chili class in the winter.
Okay. I see you, Tony.
Good night, everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Chili cat, red chili.
Probably pumpkin.